Hi, folks. Welcome to the show. And as we're heading into the long weekend, wishing everyone happy and safe 4th of July weekend. We'll have a quick episode of the show today. Today, we're going to double click into cloud infrastructure entitlement management or CIEM. We talked a little bit about it in the last episode. It's a pretty interesting topic. The space is evolving. It's a very dynamic space, and also just in terms of usage and the way CIEM is proliferating is pretty dynamic, as we had spoken last time. Before we move ahead, we do have a guest on the show today, Neville Mendonca. Neville has been on the show a few times before, as many of you know. He's a senior architect with ISSQUARED and is also a thought leader in the IAM space. So before we hand over to Neville, just a little bit of a recap from last time. When we talk about the CIEM space, which is on cloud infrastructure entitlement management. One of the aspects of this is as compared to on-prem, there's a significant difference in fundamentally the relatively static nature of on-prem versus the very fluid nature of entitlements in the cloud and public cloud, especially because of the ease with which one could spin up, let's say, VPCs in AWS, gain entitlements, do a bunch of stuff, and especially in the DevOps field where there's a lot of scaling up, scaling down, testing. What happens is that the management of entitlements and the sheer rapidness and the fluidity with which entitlements change or needed to be changed, how to get elevated access, these are all complicated, especially when it goes at scale. And so when you look at an enterprise, and as the enterprise gets bigger and as the cloud footprint gets bigger over time, especially in the IaaS space or infrastructure as a service and platform as a service, the whole CIEM concept is very important to understand. There is no one tool or magic bullet per se, but a good understanding of the concepts and kind of the foundations around CIEM can really help with a good CIEM strategy. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Neville. Neville, any kind of opening remarks on CIEM, or we can jump right into it? We've already covered this in a little bit in earlier sessions. The last session, I kind of went a little deeper. But first of all, great to have you. And over to you, Neville.
All right, Suchinth. Thank you for having me on the show again. So let's jump into what a CIEM is all about. CIEM, as it stands for, it's Cloud Infrastructure Entitlement Management. So as we see, more and more organizations are moving into the cloud, and some of them are moving into multi-cloud environments. On the other side, these cloud service providers, they keep adding more and more services. Thousands of services are added over the last few years, and the list keeps on growing. So, as a result of this, there is an explosion of permissions in the cloud. Now, here is another fact: the cloud service providers offer services and they offer ways to manage access to these services. But managing the access is the sole responsibility of the client organization. So if this is not planned and executed well, you end up giving access to users they don't need by increasing the disruptive blast radius. Now, the traditional IAM tools were not designed to manage these huge volumes of entitlements. They're not able to scale. Also, these traditional IAM tools, they're designed to manage static data and not the dynamic user behavior data. CIM gives you a good pathway to fill in the gaps we have with using the traditional IAM tools. Now, what does CIM has to offer? CIM offers advanced analytics along with machine learning capabilities. So basically, what happens is CIM, first of all, as far as data is concerned, right? So CIM combines the static entitlement data. When I say static entitlement data, I'm talking about identities. I'm talking about the accounts, the groups, and their entitlements, and the dynamic user behavioral data, which is the log data, the audit data, and the event data. Now you apply analytics on top of these two data sets and you can report on all the access anomalies like identities having access they never used or dormant inactive accounts. So these are the examples which can then be remediated either using your existing processes or via CIM. You can have automatic remediations. So in addition to this, the machine learning capabilities. So you can find end user patterns. For example, there could be entitlements the user has access to, but they have rarely used this. So these can then be set up for these entitlements which are hardly used can then be set up for a just-in-time access. So there are various gaps that a CIM fills in with the traditional IAM tools. I'm not saying CIM can altogether replace these IAM tools, but they it uh, addresses those issues which like scalability, etc., which were not thought about when these IAM tools were designed.
On-prem versus in the cloud, right? So when we talked about the tools, I think what we're seeing is just to kind of add to what you were saying. I don't know if necessarily one set of tools is going to replace the others, but what we are seeing is the traditional IAM vendors are also moving kind of in a direction to add, they have been rapidly adding cloud functionality. But I think what's happened when you talked about just-in-time access, when you look at PIM, PAM, or privileged access management in the cloud, and then you combine it with just entitlement management. A lot of these concepts get bundled together. So right now, what we're seeing is in companies that are maybe more further ahead in their cloud journey, as well as kind of the access management or entitlement management journey, is kind of it always starts with traditionally if they've had a very sound on-prem foundation on entitlement management, but then taken those kind of high level concepts, but then applied maybe different tools, technologies, in some cases, a combination of the traditional IAM with next generation analytics. So I think that's kind of how we're seeing the industry evolve right now, where there's a dramatic change in the way CIEM entitlements. I would say the dramatic change of pace at which the cloud usage, as we've known over the last few years, has increased. That causes a kind of a strain on the enterprise infrastructure to keep up. So having a good CIM strategy in place it kind of becomes very critical, and this is where analytics come in. So Neville, you touched upon analytics and machine learning. What, in your opinion, given your extensive knowledge, kind of in the access management space over the last, several years, and that journey from I'm going to say now at the hybrid point where most I would say customers, mid to large size customers, are in some kind of hybrid model of public cloud, private cloud, and on-prem. What do you talk about analytics, the use of analytics, the role of analytics? Can you elaborate a little more on where you see that going, and what kind of analytics are useful in this space?
Sure. This is what it is, right? Like the traditional IAM tools, they work on static entitlement data. So they were designed to manage identities, their accounts, the groups, the entitlements. Now, with the adoption of cloud, so there is another aspect to this data, like the dynamic user behavior data, like the audit data, the events, the log data. So CIM tools, they give you the ability to combine these two data sets. Now an analytics come into picture where now you analyze, okay, these are the users, these are their accounts, and these are the entitlements or permissions that these users have within the organization. Within it could be your on-prem environment, or it could be in the cloud environment. So now where analytics come into picture is like now you are able to pull reports of what are the accounts that are actually being used, right? What are the inactive accounts? So these are the ones that you can immediately uh, delete or disable. So the next part is these your active accounts. So what is that they're accessing today? To have that access, do they need all the permissions they do have? Producing reports and some of these tools that are existing in the market, so they do automatic remediation as well. So looking at the user behavior, they would find these anomalies. Okay, this user has these many permissions or entitlements, but some of these permissions are not really needed to do the day-to-day activities that he or she is doing. So go ahead and revoke that access, and accordingly, like, even go and uh, adjust the policies, the birthright policies that are set up by the organization. So right sizing the permissions or right sizing the entitlements. So this is where analytics come into picture. Like, this helps you move towards the least privileged access model.
What I've seen over the, like, if you even just compare in the last 3 to 5 years, what we've seen is kind of a journey, around analytics, logging, monitoring, looking for patterns where, all of these things, they are intertwined. And with the, I'm going to say, deeper focus on security and cloud security, I think what initially started maybe as back in the day, maybe I'm going to say even just, yeah, as like 5 to 7 years ago, as basic kind of changes to, let's say, S3 buckets, or leaving some S3 buckets as public, the things like that get flagged for review. So I think a combination of having least privilege access, having a CIEM strategy, having kind of a good roadmap on how you want to handle entitlements, and then couple that with a very good strategy on analytics, which could be also a mix of reporting, logging, and responding to alerts. I think all of this is where I think security, identity management, and just entitlement management, all of these come together in terms of just having a very strong response and very quick response when you see some anomalies. But on yeah, but I think so. Thanks for that, Neville. And just moving on from here, Neville, I think we're going to have a kind of a shorter session today, heading into the long weekend. But kind of maybe a last question or two. Where do you see this industry growing now, or what would you advise to companies that are, let's just say, at a reasonable level of maturity on IAM for on-prem, but maybe the cloud has been in place, public, private slash hybrid cloud, but they're not that advanced yet in the entitlement management. What would you advise somebody who's maybe early on in the journey? What are some of the key elements to consider while developing a CIEM strategy?
So there are a few things over here that we need to consider. Let me take a step back, right? The cloud service providers, they do have tools to address these issues. They do have tools for doing analytics. They do have tools for analyzing the user behavioral patterns, but these tools are specific to their clouds. For example, AWS would have tools to analyze behavior within AWS, but then there are certain companies that move into multi-cloud environment, and then the way these entitlements are set up in one on one cloud platform are is not the same the way the entitlements are set up within another cloud platform. So the tools that are out there, I mean, this CIM technology, it has been there for a couple of years now. There are tools out there that focus on CIM, and I've even seen, like, the vendors with the traditional IAM tools. They have been acquiring CIM tools, so to add to their portfolios. Um, but uh, the fact remains as, like, the way these entitlements are created. Um so basically, there needs to be a strategy for creating the entitlements, whichever cloud environment it is, um, and then a thorough evaluation of the tools out there in the industry needs to be done. Whether so, it's important to first figure out. that the tool that you're choosing would address the use cases that you have in your environment. So that's critical.
Right now is the space is evolving. As you said, there are companies that kind of started out with looking at this I would say specific segment of the industry and focusing solely on cloud infrastructure entitlement management. But then the traditional IAM vendors are looking at kind of moving into this space, and that's kind of where some of these things overlap as well, but they're also distinct to some degree. So to the point you made, I think it's really important to understand, just like everything else, is to understand the core use cases and just the way your particular organization needs, what are the needs of entitlement. If it's DevOps, is there frequent need for kind of scaling up for testing? Is there a lot of development community that's going to spin up resources? Those kind of things. And once you have a really good idea on how kind of the cloud side of the house is working compared to on-prem, and a lot of stuff today is happening in the cloud primarily, especially for companies in the DevOps space. But if you move a little bit more to the enterprise space, there could be certain areas or business units that are more active in the cloud, doing more kind of development and have need to spin up more resources. Once you get a really good idea, I think it may be at this stage a combination of tools, but a really good framework around CIEM with many of the points, Neville, that you mentioned, focusing on analytics, least privilege access. Now, none of these concepts by themselves are new, and they apply across platforms and across like geographies and even methodologies, whether it's going to be on-prem or in the cloud. But fundamentally, you want to have a strong framework, strong foundations, but then all these tie together very closely when it comes to cloud. And I think you brought up a very interesting point of how a lot of the cloud providers have tools and technologies. Some have more than others, some are more prolific, but each one is focused on their cloud. So especially when you have a multi-cloud kind of a situation, I think your point on analytics, machine learning becomes even more important. So I think the core takeaway here, Neville, if I can kind of maybe to put a footnote or summarize all this, is that having a framework on how you want to manage CIEM, a roadmap, and having the right technologies, given where the technologies are today, and recognizing the fact that you cannot afford to not have a CIEM strategy is probably the most critical first step if you don't already have that. Most companies have, I think without knowing it, already have some kind of analytics or reporting or security tools, but having a more thought out roadmap strategy around CIM and a framework, let's call it, at this stage of the game, is very critical. And some companies are ahead. I think there's a lot of companies that born in the cloud, DevOps, have been dealing with this issue for many years. In the enterprise, I would say more traditional enterprise and large enterprise space, I think we're seeing more of a recognition where CIEM roadmaps are being combined with kind of the overall IAM roadmaps of the organization, and I think that's a good thing because going forward, this problem is only going to get bigger, or rather, I would say this kind of situation and dealing with it and having a strategy is going to become even more important. So, Neville, once again, thank you very much. It's always great to have you on the show. We'll have you back very soon. I think we'll keep a watch in this space, and maybe a few episodes from now, or as we see more developments in CIAM, we'll probably double click into it more. But once again, Neville, thank you. Have a good, 4th of July weekend, and to all our viewers as well, have a happy and safe long weekend. And thanks everyone for joining the show. Thank you.
Thank you, Sachin. Thanks for having me here. Thank you.